I was still standing at the edge of the grave when my phone buzzed. Not in my pocket. Not muffled. Loud, against the polished oak casket, where I'd set it while I pressed both palms into the dirt. Like if I leaned hard enough, she'd answer me. I'd just finished whispering. "It's done now, Mama. You can rest." When that goddamn buzz snapped through the silence like a slap. I thought maybe it was the florist, late, maybe, or a text from my aunt stuck in traffic. But no. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. Please return all company property. HR. No condolences. No, we're sorry for your loss. Just a bullet between the eyes dressed up like a memo. They couldn't even wait until Monday. Couldn't give me the decency of a single day to bury the woman who bled this company into existence, while they all sat in ergonomic chairs and called themselves founders. I read it twice. Then once more, slow, like maybe I'd missed a line. I hadn't. The rest of the message just asked for my badge and laptop, and offered a smiley face at the end. A fucking emoji. They might as well have spit on the headstone. If you're still watching this and you're one of the 97% who hasn't subscribed yet, do me a solid. Hit that button. Like the video. It keeps stories like this alive and keeps our team fueled up for more. You won't regret it, especially not with what's about to unfold. I didn't react at first. Not visibly. Just stared at the screen. Thumb hovering like I might reply. I didn't. Instead, I closed the phone, slipped it into my coat pocket, and looked back down at her name carved into granite. You see that, Mama? I whispered. They really did it. 6 years I gave them. 6 years of silence, skipped birthdays, no sick days, and a promotion that was always under review. I'd been passed over so many times I stopped counting. Not a leadership fit, they said once. Lacks presence. Well, presence wasn't something I'd ever been short on. I just saved it for places where it mattered. Like hospitals, when I watched her shrink into herself while she told me, "Don't make this about revenge, baby. Just make it right." She never wanted the spotlight. She gave up her voting rights years ago. Let the company get diluted down into a playground for tech bros with buzzwords and vests. But her shares? Those never went public. Never changed hands. They sat in a trust. A quiet, dusty little corner of the law no one ever bothered to clean. And now, that dust belonged to me. I didn't cry. Not when we lowered her in. Not when they folded her favorite cardigan and left it behind. And not when that HR clown fired me like I was a temp who spilled coffee on a keyboard. No. What I felt wasn't grief anymore. It was something colder. Thinner. Like a wire tightening just behind the eyes. As people drifted from the gravesite, muttering how lovely the service was, how strong I must be, I nodded. Said thank you. Hugged hands. Smiled like a woman unraveling slowly and politely. Nobody knew I was already building something in my head. Not vengeance. Not yet. But architecture. Quiet scaffolding. Because if they thought they buried a nobody today, they had no idea who they just fired. They never really saw me. Not once. Not when I stayed late fixing the forecasting models after their strategic hires accidentally overwrote half the fiscal quarter. Not when I trained 4 different interns who got promoted within a year, while I stayed parked in the same windowless cubicle between the janitor's closet and the vending machine with the stuck 7-Up button. I didn't even have a nameplate. Just a laminated badge that said Jack W. And a login tied to the project management platform no one else ever wanted to learn. I became wallpaper. The kind that peels a little in the corner, and everyone notices, but no one fixes. They liked me quiet. Useful but forgettable. Sometimes I'd speak up during planning meetings, offer a more efficient solution, or point out a compliance flag they missed. Most times they talked over me. Other times I got a polite nod and a, "Thanks, Jack, we'll circle back." They never circled back. I remember one review, maybe 2 years in. HR sat across from me, chewing on the cap of her pen while she clicked through my metrics. Flawless. No late deadlines. No customer complaints. Nothing flashy, but solid. She scrolled, sighed, and said, "You're consistent, Jack. But there's a question of impact." Then she looked up and smiled like she was offering a warm cookie. "You're a little non-impactful." Non-impactful. like a ghost brushing past a curtain. I wrote it down, not out of spite, just to remember, because I knew how they kept score. At Woodrow, if you weren't loud, branded, or part of someone's drinks after work circle, you didn't count. You weren't visible. I never went to happy hour. I didn't decorate my desk with Marvel figurines or ironic mugs. I didn't join the Fantasy Football League or that stupid step challenge. Hell, I once brought in homemade cookies and left them anonymously in the break room. They spent 2 hours trying to guess which executive assistant baked them. Never once looked my way. But I watched. That was my thing. I paid attention when no one thought I was paying attention. I saw which vendors the CFO always lowballed, which department heads doctored sprint results before quarterly reviews. I watched the product team inflate backlog tickets, and the engineering team bury outages under vague API delays. I saw it all, and I stayed quiet, not because I was scared, but because I was patient. My mother once said, "The best revenge is letting people mistake you for harmless long enough to hand you the keys." So I played the part. Quiet Jack. Spreadsheet Jack. The guy who asked about your kid's soccer game, but never mentioned if he had any of his own. I let them keep thinking they were the ones running things, the architects of innovation. I let them believe that I was just there. But behind that badge, behind the boring button-downs and the takeout containers no one asked to share, I was writing something else. A mental ledger. A full ecosystem of who really did what, who faked what, and who thought the walls were thick enough to talk freely behind. They thought I was nobody. I was just taking notes. The house smelled like lemon polish and old paper. The kind of smell that hits you in waves, grief laced with citrus. I hadn't been back since hospice rolled the bed out. Her sweater still hung on the back of the kitchen chair. Her teacup, clean but not put away, waited in the drying rack like it didn't know she wasn't coming back. I should have gone to sleep. I hadn't eaten since the funeral. But instead I walked straight to her office. The sunroom she'd converted with a folding desk and too many manila folders stacked like sediment. I stood there for a long time. Then I opened the middle drawer. The trust papers were in a blue file labeled for Jack. When it's time. No embellishments. No letter. Just notarized documents, legal exhibits, and a final certified copy of her living will, bundled with a post-it in her looping, delicate handwriting. Read it all. Twice. I read it 5 times. She hadn't just owned stock in Woodrow. She'd owned Woodrow. Through 4 layers of shell corporations, 1 Delaware holding company, and a family trust established before I was even born. My mother had retained a controlling interest, quietly, legally, and with ironclad stipulations. Her name hadn't appeared on anything in over a decade, not since the original founder team restructured her out of her own company to make room for flashier names and startup capital. But she'd stayed in the background, funding operations, making payroll, watching. And now it was mine. There was a moment, maybe 10 seconds, where I just sat in her chair stunned. I could have sold it, cashed out, walked away, started a new life somewhere warmer, quieter, where no one had ever heard of Woodrow Systems or Blake goddamn Thatcher. But I didn't. I reached for the original charter documents instead. They were tucked in the back, 3-hole punched, barely touched since incorporation. I spread them across the desk and began highlighting like it was the final exam of my life. Page 14, subsection 7. Page 29, Class B shareholder rights. And then on page 42, I found it. A clause no one had probably read in 15 years. Continuity clause, section 18C. In the event the acting CEO engages in any action determined to be in breach of fiduciary duty or ethical protocol, voting power shall transfer immediately to the primary Class B shareholder of record until such a time as ethical alignment is re-established or the board elects a replacement by 2/3 majority. It didn't just give me a vote. It gave me the trigger. But I couldn't pull it yet. Not without proof. Not without a meeting. And not without reminding them that while they were busy pitching to investors and shaving off salaries to boost margins, someone had been paying attention to the rules they thought no one enforced. I leaned back, the folder open on my lap, my mother's handwriting fading in the top corner. Make it right. That's all she asked. Not burn it down. Not ruin them. Just make it right. I turned to the final document in the file, a legal transfer of trustee power, Pre-signed, pre-witnessed, effective immediately upon her passing. My signature was the only one missing. No parade. No headlines. Just ink and intent. I picked up the pen. And I signed. The office was still there, a corner suite above a florist and a hearing aid clinic, tucked into a brick building that looked like it hadn't been renovated since fax machines were still sexy. The brass letters still read Marston and Bell LLP, slightly crooked like always. My mother hated that. Said it gave the wrong impression, like they weren't precise. But she kept them on retainer anyway. They don't smile much, she told me once, but they read fine print like scripture. The receptionist recognized me. Didn't even ask for ID. Just said, "Ms. Bell's waiting," and buzzed me through. Elizabeth Bell was sharper than I remembered. Older now, more gray than blonde, but still dressed like she could get a hedge fund with a ballpoint pen and a half-smile. She didn't waste time with condolences. Just nodded, placed the trust paperwork on the table between us and said, "You ready?" I nodded once. No small talk. No tears. Just the pen, the paper, and the weight of a company I never asked to inherit. One document. That's all it took. I initialed twice, signed once, and slid it back across the table. That was the moment everything shifted. Quietly. Without announcement. The transfer finalized, legal and irreversible. I was now the primary holder of Class B shares, the ones with teeth. The ones with claws buried deep in Woodrow's bones. Elizabeth pushed a second folder toward me, thicker, bound with legal thread. "This is your governance invocation," she said. Standard language. It activates Section 18C, under continuity, and requires a special executive session within 72 hours. Do you want to attend? I shook my head. I want them off balance, I said. I want them thinking it's procedural. Make it boring. Bury them in polite legalese. Just enough to confuse them. Not enough to alarm. She cracked the faintest grin. They won't see it coming. No, I said, standing. They won't. The proxy went out that afternoon. Couriers hand-delivered sealed packets to every board member, marked confidential, governance oversight session. The language was stiff, bureaucratic. The kind of thing execs skim and delegate to assistants, assuming it's just a formality or some quarterly checkbox. That was by design. Not one of them knew it came from me. Not Blake, who spent his days parading through the office with his lacquered haircut and 2 phones clipped to his belt like a suburban cowboy. Not Erica in HR, who once told me she was streamlining underperformers to make room for culture creators. Not the CFO who drank scotch in his office at 2:15 and thought spreadsheets were beneath him. They thought it was business as usual. A harmless ping from some dusty clause long forgotten. Maybe even a vendor compliance review. No one read the fine print. They didn't know the signature at the bottom belonged to the same guy who used to eat tuna salad alone in the corner booth of the break room. The guy who held the door open, printed double-sided, and got laughed at for still using sticky notes. And when Elizabeth walked into that session, dressed like quiet thunder with a 3-inch binder in one hand and a court-stamped affidavit in the other, not one of them thought to ask, "Why now? Why her?" And more importantly, who sent her? They say the walls at Woodrow are thin, but it's not the walls that talk, it's the break room. The one by the HR pod with the flickering light no one ever replaced. That's where the whispers started. You hear about that shareholder meeting? Governance something, right? Who called it? No clue. It's not on the internal calendar. Legal must be running some kind of compliance audit. I sat 2 tables down, half hidden behind the quarterly roadmap printouts I was technically supposed to have shredded before they fired me. My badge didn't scan anymore, but no one questioned a man in a tie holding a clipboard. Amazing how invisible you can be when you walk like you belong. They still didn't see me. At the next table, some junior project manager with cuffed chinos and Bluetooth earbuds shook his head and muttered. Probably Blake covering his ass before the acquisition. Jack used to talk about that clause crap all the time. Someone else laughed. Jack. He's gone, man. Let him be. Let him be. Like I was a mosquito. A blip. Some spreadsheet ghost who didn't know how to stay fired. They didn't know the continuity clause was active. They didn't know I never really left. They didn't know the woman walking into the executive session tomorrow morning was armed with documentation that went deeper than Blake's entire tenure. But someone was starting to catch on. Her name was Kaya, finance analyst, 2 years in, fresh from Wharton, sharp as glass. She sat 3 rows behind my old cubicle, always quiet, always observing. We'd spoken maybe 5 times total. Once about redundant invoice logs. Another time about vendor accounts with suspicious overlapping PO dates. She'd always had that look, the one that noticed things. Noticed people. I saw her squinting at her monitor that afternoon, flipping between legal files and archived equity spreadsheets. She had 3 browser tabs open to corporate registry sites, and an email half-drafted to legal review at Woodrow. She was onto something. I watched her scroll past an old trust record tied to something called Langford Holdings, paused, then backed up. That was my grandfather's trust. The name was never public, just a quiet funding entity that seeded the original cash flow for Woodrow before it had even been incorporated. I watched her blink, stare, then pull up a PDF of the original articles of incorporation. She was doing the math. Slowly, carefully, following the breadcrumbs no one else had ever cared enough to chase. And there it was. The company wasn't built on venture capital. It wasn't built on Blake's vision. It wasn't even built on the so-called founding team they showcased at tech conferences. It was built on a loan secured by Langford Holdings in 1997. A loan issued by a man who used to carry cash in his socks and wrote contracts in pencil before my mother took over and digitized it all. A man they never thanked. A woman they erased. And now their quiet shadow, their afterthought, the non-impactful man they let go during a burial, was reclaiming the deed. Kaya stood abruptly, headed toward legal. I didn't stop her. Let the truth unravel one thread at a time. Let the echo carry. Blake Thatcher held court like he was royalty. Cufflinks gleaming. Shirt so starched it could cut glass. He raised his overpriced tumbler of something imported, something smoky and smug, and said, "Here's to agility, to focus, and to cutting dead weight before it clogs the engine." The room laughed. The kind of laugh that travels sideways, through clenched teeth and upward eyes. The VP of sales clinked glasses with the guy from BizDev who still called himself a disruptor, on LinkedIn. Even HR was there, sipping rose like it was earned. And let's not forget, Blake added, loud enough for the interns pretending not to eavesdrop, that some roles just don't scale. We had a few long-timers with, what's the word? He looked around. Feigning search, the way predators do when they want the audience to fill in the cruelty. Minimal impact, someone offered with a smirk. Blake grinned. Yes, that's it. Low impact. You can't lead a revolution with spreadsheet guys stuck in 2008. The room laughed again. Harder this time. Toasts went up. Glasses clinked. But no one noticed the man in the gray windbreaker standing at the edge of the mezzanine, next to the janitor's cart and a dead ficus plant. No one noticed that he didn't raise a glass, didn't move, just watched. I watched. It was almost poetic. Blake, celebrating a deal he wasn't authorized to finalize. Toasting a streamlined org chart that violated the very clause his signature had once acknowledged in a throwaway onboarding doc. He thought he had total control. But the acquisition he was hyping, the one that made the junior staff giddy and the old guard nervous, couldn't legally proceed without a majority shareholder's approval. Not just board approval. Not legal review. A signature. A real one. Wet ink from someone who mattered. But Blake didn't know who that was. He thought it was still tied up in legacy equity, spread across passive investors too far removed to interfere. He had no idea that 6 days ago, the woman who used to hold those shares passed quietly, without fanfare, and that the ink had already dried, transferring every last ounce of power into the hands of someone he'd fired via email. Someone whose name he probably didn't even remember. I didn't move when they brought out the cake. Q3 Kings it read, in gold lettering over marble fondant. I didn't flinch when they played the hype reel with Blake's voice narrating their aggressive go-to-market shift. All set to pulsing synth and stock footage of logistics trucks climbing mountain highways. He had no idea the hill he was climbing was already owned. The meeting room next door had been reserved under a legal pseudonym. Elizabeth was prepping the documents. The call was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. That gave him exactly 15 hours to keep smiling. 15 hours to bask in the applause of people too scared to correct him. 15 hours to drink champagne he didn't earn. And not one of them knew that his acquisition deal, all 47 million of it, would trigger the continuity clause the second he submitted it without my signature. No, Blake didn't know who held the majority, but he would. Tomorrow. The notice hit Blake's desk at 7:42 a.m. sharp. Not in his inbox. Not a calendar invite. A thick, embossed envelope delivered by private courier. Hand-signed, chain of custody logged, time-stamped down to the second. The envelope alone probably costs more than the quarterly software bonus he once denied to an entire department. He slid it open with the gold-plated letter opener shaped like a damn katana. Thought he was a warrior. A modern samurai of business, as he liked to say during his fireside chats with interns too intimidated to laugh. His eyes scanned the page once, then again slower. Notice of Executive Governance Session, Section 12C. Summons issued per Continuity Oversight Clause. Articles of Incorporation, Sector 18C. Time, 9 a.m. Location, Boardroom A. Attendance mandatory. Summons issued by JW, majority shareholder of record. He froze. Then he blinked like maybe it was a misprint. Like the world had misspelled itself. JW. He said it aloud, like the syllables might explain themselves. Then the color started to drain from his face. He dialed legal, internal extension fast. Got Lindsay, the associate GC who usually handled NDAs and expense fraud complaints. Lindsay, he barked. I just got some governance garbage. A Section 12C? Do we even use that clause? Silence. Then a cough. That clause hasn't been invoked since the founding. But it's real. By who? He snapped. Who signed this? More silence. Then, sir, it's legally binding. We're already flagged. The room's reserved. I've got Bell and Associates on the docket, and sir, this signature. It's J. Warner. Jack. Blake muttered. He stood too quickly, bumping his desk. A coffee mug toppled. Are you telling me that Jack Warner is the? We verified it. Sir. It's real. He's the beneficiary of the trust that holds the Class B control. The succession triggered last week. Succession. When? After Evelyn Warner's death. He sat back down. Hard. Like the air had been punched out of him. I wasn't in the hallway when he walked to Boardroom A. I didn't need to be. I could imagine it perfectly. That too straight spine. The forced calm. The deep inhale before entering what he thought was just a formality. Maybe a compliance review, maybe a vendor contract oversight. He opened the door. The room was quiet. No pleasantries. No fruit trai. Just chairs. Legal counsel. 2 board members. And 1 new nameplate at the head of the table. Jack Warner, majority shareholder. I stood as he entered. His eyes did a double take. First at the nameplate. Then at me. And for the first time since I'd known him, since he'd mocked my quiet little spreadsheets, and cut my project mid-cycle to make budget room for his Vegas keynote, Blake Thatcher had no words. I didn't offer any either. Just a quiet nod. And the simple satisfaction of watching his whole face rewire around a truth he hadn't seen coming. The man he fired by email, the same day he was lowering his mother into the earth, was now the one calling the meeting. I didn't speak right away. Blake kept waiting for the room to shift, for someone, anyone, to leap to his defense, call it a misunderstanding, crack a joke to break the silence. But no one did. No one even looked at him. Legal sat with hands folded, 2 laptops open, 1 voice recorder running. The board members, the 2 who showed, had already been briefed. They didn't ask why I was here. They asked why it took this long. I opened the binder. Each tab marked. Each page time-stamped. 6 violations, I said calmly. We'll begin with breach of fiduciary duty. I slid the first document across the table. Unauthorized amendment of supplier contracts to favor personal associates. That's 1. Blake started to speak, but I held up a hand. Not aggressive, just surgical. 2, I continued. Diverting company resources to fund travel unrelated to Woodrow Systems operations, including personal wellness retreats in Sedona booked under consulting codes. He flushed. Red then pale. His hand twitched toward his phone, like maybe he could undo it all with a well-placed call. 3. I went on, knowingly advancing an acquisition deal without required shareholder consent, in violation of the Articles of Incorporation Section 18C. I tapped the page. And that, I said, is where the clause activated. Legal nodded. One of them, Elizabeth, seated just behind me, slid the activation confirmation across the table. A thick packet. Sealed. Signed. Unmistakable. You're bluffing, Blake said, voice tight. I'm not, I replied evenly. I'm reading. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't stand. I let the silence work like acid. 4. I continued. Retaliatory firings under pretext, including mine, executed while I was attending my mother's funeral. Blake opened his mouth, then closed it. I won't fire you, Blake, I said, finally looking him in the eyes. You already did that part. So did the clause. And just like that, it broke. The tension. The illusion. The last scraps of control he clung to like a drowning man with a ripped life vest. One of the VPs, HR, stood up and excused herself. Didn't even make eye contact. Another, from Biz Dev, muttered, Jesus, under his breath and followed her out. The CFO, to his credit, stayed put, but leaned forward, elbows on knees, and whispered, We didn't know. You never asked, I said. Blake finally slumped back into his chair like a marionette with the strings cut. Whatever storm he'd been preparing to unleash never came. He looked smaller now, like someone seeing his own reflection for the first time and not recognizing what stared back. I closed the binder. As of this session, I said, your role as CEO is concluded under the conditions outlined in Section 18C. You will receive counsel. The board will determine the structure of your exit. But effective immediately, operations will proceed without your leadership. The room held its breath. Someone sniffed. Someone else exhaled slowly. But no one clapped. No applause. No fanfare. Just consequence. Then, after a beat, one board member asked softly, Who'll lead interim operations? I already knew. I turned toward the glass doors. Allison, I called. She stepped in from the hallway, plain black slacks, sleeves rolled, hair in a bun. She used to eat lunch with the interns, listen more than she spoke, and once stayed until 2 a.m. rewriting a budget forecast the CFO botched because he'd confused net and gross margin. She'd been overlooked so often they stopped copying her on emails that had her name in the subject line. Now she walked in like the floor knew her name. This is Allison Chu, I said. Your new CEO. Effective immediately. A long pause. Then, for the first time all morning, movement. Several heads nodded. Legal confirmed. The board signed the preliminary appointment. Allison stood behind the chair Blake had occupied like it didn't matter. Because it didn't. And as for me, I stood. Straightened my jacket. Collected nothing. I wasn't here to take a throne. Just to pull the lever they'd forgotten I was holding. The quiet hit me first. Not silence. Woodrow was never silent. Printers still hummed. Phones still buzzed. Someone's lunch still beeped in the microwave 2 floors up. But it was the kind of quiet that told you something had shifted. A reverence. A focus. The kind of quiet that comes when people are finally working toward something they believe in instead of just surviving the day. It had been 3 weeks. No headlines. No press release. Just a ripple. Blake was transitioned. HR said it was mutual. The board mumbled about philosophical divergence. No one corrected them. No one needed to. The staff knew. Change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks in, makes eye contact, and stays. I moved through the halls slow, unannounced. No clipboard this time. No cover. Just me. The man whose badge they deactivated the same hour. He lowered his mother into the ground. A few nods. One smile from Kaya in finance, who didn't say anything but left her screen unlocked long enough for me to see the policy draft titled Ethical Oversight Recommendations. Section 18 Modernization. Smart kid. I took the long way to the corner office. The one with the frosted glass Blake used to lock anytime he took a Zoom call with investors he pretended were his friends. The door was open now. Half ajar. No look. Inside, no power poses, no fake marble desk, no aquarium full of forgotten fish. Just Allison. Sleeves rolled. Hair tied back. Laptop open. A whiteboard filled with real goals, not buzzwords. And the nameplate? Allison Zhu, CEO. Simple. Clean. No title inflation. No chief visionary strategist. Just her name. As it should have been years ago. I didn't go in. Didn't knock. Just stood there a moment, like someone checking the foundation of a house they'd rebuilt after a storm. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the original HR email. The one that ended everything before they knew what they'd triggered. I'd printed it, folded it carefully. On the back in black ink, one word. Revised. I slipped it under the door. No ceremony. No told you so. Just a quiet edit to a mistake they thought would go unnoticed. I turned to leave, walking past the break room where someone had put up a birthday banner for a junior dev. People were laughing. Actually laughing, not that brittle, performative kind that used to haunt every Monday stand-up. And just before I reached the exit, I saw it. In the lobby, tucked between a fire extinguisher and a wall-mounted directory, was a small photo in a dark wooden frame. No plaqué, no backlicht, just quietly placed, quietly present. My mother, smiling in front of the original Woodrow warehouse. Wind in her hair, clipboard in hand, eyes focused. No name beneath it. She didn't need one. And maybe after all this time neither did I.